My mom told everyone I loved sleeping on the floor outside, and they believed her for 3 years straight. My mother only wanted one of her children to be resilient. Me, not my fragile sister who needed her beauty sleep in her heated princess room. Just me, the adopted child who needed to be toughened up. On my 8th birthday, she forced me to sleep on the porch in the middle of winter so I could grow into a real man. Luckily, my big brother Hugo saw me and asked what was going on. He wanted to camp outside. Mom's voice was honey-sweet as she appeared in the doorway, her silk robe wrapped tight. You know how boys are with their adventure phases. Hugo looked between us, and I saw something flicker in his eyes. It's 28 degrees, Mom. That's when the tears started. Perfect, crystalline tears rolling down her cheeks. You think I'm a bad mother? I do everything alone since Dad left. Everything. Her voice cracked perfectly on the last word. Hugo's shoulders dropped. Mom, I didn't mean I'm trying my best with him. He's not like you and Jenny. He needs different approaches. She dabbed her eyes with her sleeve, and I noticed she was careful not to smudge her makeup. Later that night, after Hugo went back to his dorm, she crouched beside me on the porch. Your brother was weak at your age too. Always crying, always needing comfort. I don't want you growing up soft like him. Her breath made little clouds in the cold air. This is for your own good. By October, while Jenny was picking out new flannel sheets with unicorns on them, I got a sleeping bag that smelled like mold and whatever character I was supposedly building. But Mom just watched me through the kitchen window. Water never hurt anyone, she called through the glass. Vikings bathed in ice water. Fast forward a few months later, to when Hugo came home for Thanksgiving. I'd been practicing what to say to raise subtle alarm bells. Right when he asked how school was going, I responded with, "Good, BTW. Have you ever had frostbite before?" Mom's laugh tinkled like breaking glass. He's so dramatic. Kids play in snow for hours. He's trying to guilt you because you're visiting. Jenny nodded enthusiastically. He builds snow forts every morning. I watched Hugo's face carefully. Slowly, he began nodding like it made perfect sense. When he went back to school, Mom made sure I understood my mistake. You embarrassed me in front of your brother. Her nails dug into my shoulder. Real men don't complain. The thing about lies is they get easier the more you tell them. By January, I almost believed that I wanted to be outside. I guess it was just easier than the alternative. I was outside for the 3rd day in a row, watching my tears freeze into icicles on my cheeks when I did the unthinkable. I knocked on the door of my home. "You're not even mine," was the first thing she said. "But I took you in anyway, and this is how you repay me? By making me look like a monster?" The guilt worked. I never asked again. I learned to curl up against the door like a dog and listen to the TV through the walls. "He sleepwalks," Mom told anyone who asked. "We've tried everything. Doctors say he'll grow out of it." Then came February 15th. Hugo texted that he was coming home early to beat the snowstorm. And for the first time in months, I didn't even try to find shelter against the door. I just lay down in the snow and closed my eyes. I need to toughen up. I don't deserve to be warm, I repeated to myself. I'm not sure how long I was there before I heard Mom's voice. Get up right now." She was trying to drag me to make sure I didn't die under her watch, but I didn't care anymore. "No, you were right," I mumbled, my words slurring. "I'm too weak to be a real man. I don't deserve warmth like Jenny does." "Stop saying that. Hugo's coming home early because of the storm. Get up." That's when Hugo found us. Mom dragging me by my arms, me leaving a trail in the snow like a broken snow angel. The last thing I remember is his face going from confusion to horror to rage in about 3 seconds. "Call 911!" he was screaming. "Call 911 now!" I woke up 33 hours later to doctors diagnosing me with hypothermia and extreme frostbite. Mom was there, mascara running in black rivers. "He wanted to stay outside. Tell them you wanted to. Tell them about your camping game." "I'm sorry I'm too weak, Mom," I said, still half delirious, still trying to be the son she wanted. I tried to be tough. I tried to be a real man. "Another hour in that blizzard and he'd have died," the doctor said, not even trying to hide his disgust. "This isn't fresh air therapy. This is prolonged exposure abuse." Mom tried to spin her lies one more time, but that's when Jenny said something that made everyone in the room freeze. Something about why Dad really left. For the first time in my life, looking at my mother in handcuffs, I actually felt sorry for her. I'm telling this from 6 months out, looking back at the winter that put me in the hospital with hypothermia and frostbite that might cost me some toes. The doctors say I'm lucky to be alive, but sitting here in Hugo's warm apartment, I'm still trying to figure out what lucky actually means. The hospital kept me for 3 days total while they monitored my core temperature and the damage to my fingers and toes. The doctor explained that some of my toes might not fully recover because the tissue died from being frozen too long, and I'd need to come back for regular checkups to see if they'd have to remove any. He showed Hugo pictures on his computer of what frostbite damage looked like. pointing at the dark spots on my smallest toes and explaining about blood flow and tissue death in words I didn't really understand. The nurses came in every few hours to check my temperature and look at my feet, unwrapping the bandages carefully and writing notes on their clipboards. Eleanor from the hospital social services came to my room on the second day and explained that she'd filed a report with Child Protective Services because what happened to me wasn't an accident or a game. She was gentle but clear that the state needed to investigate how an 8-year-old ended up with severe hypothermia from sleeping outside in February. She sat in the chair next to my bed and asked me questions about how long this had been going on, writing everything down in a notebook. Mom tried to stay in my hospital room the whole time, crying and holding my hand and telling anyone who'd listen that I had sleepwalking problems she'd been trying to manage. She kept touching my hair and calling me her baby boy, acting like the concerned mother who'd been fighting to keep me safe. But after Neve's comment about why Dad really left, the police officer who'd been taking notes asked Mom to step into the hallway for some questions. I watched through the doorway as more officers arrived, and Mom's voice got higher and louder as she tried to explain. Hugo sat with me that second night after Mom got taken away in handcuffs, and he kept apologizing for not pushing harder at Thanksgiving when I'd asked about frostbite. He pulled his chair right up next to the bed and held my hand, telling me he should have known something was really wrong, that he'd let Mom's tears and excuses work on him when his gut told him I needed help. His voice kept cracking and he had to stop talking a few times to wipe his eyes. I told him it wasn't his fault because Mom was really good at making people believe her stories, but he just shook his head and said he was supposed to protect me. When I got discharged on day 3, the doctor gave Hugo a whole list of instructions about wound care for my toes, keeping me warm and watching for signs of infection. There was also a paper about a therapy referral and strict orders that I couldn't have any contact with Mom until CPS said otherwise. The doctor made Hugo repeat back the instructions about changing my bandages and checking for red streaks or bad smells that would mean infection. Hugo folded all the papers carefully and put them in his backpack, nodding at everything the doctor said. Eleanor explained that CPS had to decide within 24 to 48 hours where I'd be living while they investigated, and that Hugo had already offered to take me, but they needed to do a home check first. I felt scared about being a burden on my brother, who was supposed to be focusing on college, not taking care of a damaged kid. Hugo was only 21 and lived in a tiny apartment near campus, and I knew taking me would mess up his whole life. The CPS caseworker Julian came to meet me at the hospital before discharge, asking me questions about how long I'd been sleeping outside and whether Mom had ever hurt me in other ways. I didn't know how to explain that she never hit me or yelled much. She just made me believe I deserved the cold because I needed to be tougher than other kids. Julian had kind eyes and a quiet voice, and he didn't rush me when I had trouble finding the right words. He wrote everything down in a folder with my name on it, asking follow-up questions about what Mom said to me and whether anyone else knew what was happening. Julian interviewed Hugo and Nevaeh separately and later told me that it was clear Nevaeh had mixed feelings about Mom getting arrested. She'd told the truth about Dad leaving after he tried to report Mom once before, but she also kept saying Mom had good days and really did love us in her own way. Julian explained that Nevaeh was confused, and that was normal for kids in these situations, that she'd been treated differently than me, so her experience with Mom was different. By the end of that first week, CPS made a preliminary finding that the neglect and abuse allegations were indicated, meaning they believed Mom had deliberately harmed me. They put a temporary no-contact order in place that said Mom couldn't call, text, visit, or try to reach me through other people until the court decided what happened next. Julian came to Hugo's apartment to deliver the paperwork and explain what it all meant, going over each section slowly so we understood. The order was printed on official paper with a judge's signature at the bottom, and seeing it in writing made everything feel more real and permanent. Hugo's apartment near campus was basically one room with a bathroom attached, and a kitchen area that was just part of the living room with a counter separating them. We spent the first afternoon setting up a sleeping spot for me on the couch, piling blankets and pillows until it looked more like a nest than a bed. Hugo turned the thermostat up to 74 degrees, even though I could tell from the way he glanced at it that he usually kept it way lower to save money. Julian had told him I needed to stay consistently warm while my body recovered from the hypothermia, so Hugo didn't complain about the higher heating bill even once. The apartment felt almost too warm at first, like my skin didn't know how to handle being comfortable after months of training myself to ignore the cold. I kept touching the radiator under the window just to feel the heat coming off it, proving to myself that warmth was actually real and available whenever I wanted it. Hugo showed me where he kept the extra blankets in the hall closet and told me I could use as many as I needed, which felt strange because at Mom's house taking extra blankets would have meant I was being weak and spoiled. That first night at Hugo's place, I fell asleep on the couch feeling safer than I had in months, wrapped in 3 blankets with the heat running steady. But I woke up at 3 a.m. on the floor next to the front door, curled up in a tight ball like I'd been trying to get comfortable on the porch. My body had moved there in my sleep without me knowing, following months of programming that said the door was where I belonged at night. I was confused and cold from lying on the floor, and I didn't understand how I'd gotten there, or why my brain had decided that was the right place to be. Hugo found me there in the morning when he came out of his bedroom to make coffee, and instead of getting mad or asking a bunch of questions, he just helped me back to the couch. He made hot chocolate with extra marshmallows and handed it to me without saying anything about the floor incident, but I could see the worried look in his eyes. The worry wasn't angry or disappointed, just concerned, like he was trying to figure out what it meant that I'd moved to the door in my sleep. 2 days into staying with Hugo, my phone rang from a number I didn't recognize, and when I answered it, Mom's voice came through asking if I was okay. She said she just needed to hear that I was safe, that she was worried about me, and wanted to make sure Hugo was taking good care of me. I froze up completely, my hand gripping the phone so tight my knuckles turned white, unable to hang up or say anything back to her. Hugo noticed me standing there frozen and took the phone from my hand, telling Mom she wasn't supposed to be calling and that she was violating the court order. He ended the call and immediately texted Julian to report the violation, his fingers moving fast across his phone screen. I felt guilty for not hanging up myself, like maybe I should have been strong enough to end the call without Hugo's help. The school district called Hugo a few days later to set up a meeting about transferring me to a new school closer to his apartment. They mentioned something called a 504 plan that would give me accommodations for medical and trauma needs, like being able to leave class if I got upset or having extra time on tests. I felt embarrassed hearing about it because it meant everyone at the new school would know I was the kid with problems, the one who needed special help. Hugo said it just meant the school would help me instead of making things harder, that having accommodations wasn't something to be ashamed of. But I still felt like it was another way I was different and broken compared to normal kids who didn't need special plans. Nevaeh came to visit during the second week, and at first she kept saying things that sounded exactly like Mom's explanations. She talked about how the cold was supposed to make me stronger, how Mom had been trying to prepare me for a tough world, how maybe I'd misunderstood her intentions. I felt my stomach hurt listening to her repeat Mom's words like they made sense, like maybe I really had been too dramatic about everything. But she stayed for 3 hours instead of the 1 hour she'd planned, and we talked about specific things that had happened, like the time Mom locked the door when it was snowing, or the night she told me I didn't deserve to be warm. Before Nevaeh left, she admitted she was confused about whether Mom had been trying to help me or hurt me, that she didn't know what to believe anymore. I found an old photo album at Hugo's apartment a few days later, tucked on a shelf behind some textbooks. There were pictures from when I was really little, maybe 3 or 4 years old, including one of Dad holding me in a thick winter coat and snow boots. Someone had dressed me in layers with a hat and mittens, making sure I was protected from the cold, and Dad was smiling at the camera with his arm around me. Seeing proof that someone had once made sure I was warm and protected made something crack open in my chest, like a door I didn't know was locked, suddenly swinging wide. Maybe warmth wasn't something I had to earn after all. Maybe it was something I'd deserved all along, and Mom had just taken it away. My first appointment with the therapist Alexandra happened in week 3, and she had a calm office with soft chairs and a space heater in the corner. She turned the space heater on without me asking, just clicked it on when we sat down, and I felt grateful that she understood without me having to explain. Alexandra explained that a lot of what I was feeling and doing, like the floor sleeping and believing Mom's words, were normal responses to trauma. She said we'd work on them together at my own pace, that there was no rush and no wrong way to heal from what had happened to me. Julian came by for a home safety check and walked around Hugo's apartment pointing out things that needed improvement. He said there weren't any locks on the windows, and the front door lock was pretty basic, just a regular doorknob lock without a deadbolt. He told Hugo it wasn't a deal breaker, but that he needed to make some improvements to show he could keep me safe from Mom or anyone else. Hugo immediately pulled out his phone and ordered better locks online, even though I could tell from the way he checked his bank account first that money was tight. One night when the wind rattled the windows really loud, I started panicking and feeling like I needed to go outside because that's what I was supposed to do when it was cold. My heart was beating fast and my hands were shaking, and I couldn't remember why staying inside was okay now. Alexandra had taught me a grounding exercise where I touched 5 things and named them out loud, so I tried it sitting on the couch. I touched the couch cushion and said soft, touched the blanket and said warm, touched my phone and said smooth, touched the coffee table and said cold wood, touched my shirt and said cotton. It halfway worked to calm me down, enough that I didn't actually go to the door, but I still felt shaky and wrong for the rest of the night. A few days later, I had another nighttime episode where I started walking toward the door in my sleep, but this time, I woke Hugo up on the way there. My footsteps must have been loud enough, or maybe he was sleeping lighter now, listening for me. We stayed up for an hour talking about it, sitting on the couch with the lights on and the heat running. Hugo suggested we make a plan where I could wake him anytime I felt the pull to go outside, even if it seemed silly or annoying to me, even if it was 3 in the morning and he had class the next day. At the end of week 4, Julian showed up at the apartment again with his clipboard and serious expression. He walked around checking the new locks Hugo had installed and making notes, then sat down on the couch across from us and explained that he'd gotten reports about Mom trying to contact me through people who didn't know about the court order. Julian's voice was calm, but firm when he said that if there were more safety problems, or if Mom kept breaking the rules about contacting me, they might have to think about foster care, instead of keeping me with Hugo. My stomach hurt so bad when he said that, like someone had punched me from the inside, and I sat there nodding and promising myself I'd be better about following all the rules and not causing any more trouble for anyone. After Julian left, I went to the bathroom and threw up twice because the idea of losing Hugo and this warm apartment was worse than anything Mom had ever done to me on the porch. A few days later, Nevai came over for one of her visits, and she seemed nervous, fidgeting with her phone and not really looking at me directly. Eventually, she pulled out her phone and showed me text messages from Mom, and I could see Mom coaching her on exactly what to say to Julian during his next interview with her. The messages told Neve to emphasize that the porch sleeping was my idea, that I'd always been a dramatic kid who made things sound worse than they were, and that Mom had just been trying to help me build character like any good parent would. I watched Nevai delete the messages one by one, her thumb moving across the screen, but then she stopped and looked at me and said she wasn't totally sure Mom was wrong about everything. That comment sat in my chest like a rock because it meant Neve still believed some of Mom's lies, still thought maybe I deserved what happened, or at least that Mom had good reasons. We didn't talk much for the rest of her visit, and she left early, saying she had homework to do. At my next therapy session, Alexandra handed me a journal and gave me an assignment to write down the difference between Mom's voice in my head telling me I was weak and needed toughening and my own voice that was just starting to figure out what I actually thought about things. I stared at the blank pages for a long time because it was confusing, trying to separate the two voices when I'd believed Mom's version of reality for so many years. I started writing but kept crossing things out because I didn't know which thoughts were really mine and which ones were just Mom's words that I'd memorized and repeated until they felt true. Alexandra said it was okay if the assignment took me a while, that untangling those voices was hard work, and I shouldn't rush it. In week 5, Julian came back, and this time he brought an envelope that had been sent through Dad's attorney, and he handed it to me carefully like it might explode. Inside was a letter from Dad explaining that he'd left our family after trying to report Mom to CPS when I was 5 years old, back when the porch sleeping first started. The letter said the system had investigated, but didn't find enough proof to do anything, and Dad wrote that he couldn't stay and watch it happen again, but he also couldn't take any of us kids with him because he didn't have custody rights, since he wasn't my adoptive parent, and Mom had threatened to fight him in court if he tried. Reading Dad's words made me understand that he'd known what was happening and had tried to stop it, which was different from thinking he just abandoned us because he didn't care. I folded the letter back up and put it in my drawer next to the photo album, and I made a decision right then that I wouldn't answer any more calls from numbers I didn't recognize, and I wouldn't respond if Mom tried to get messages to me through other people. It was the first real boundary I'd ever chosen for myself, instead of having someone else tell me what to do, and even though I felt guilty about shutting Mom out completely, Hugo said it was healthy, and Alexandra said it was important for my recovery. At the school the next week, there was a fire drill during math class, and the teacher made everyone line up and walk outside to the designated meeting spot on the far side of the parking lot. We had to stand there for 15 minutes while they checked all the classrooms, and the temperature was probably in the low 30s with wind that cut through my jacket. My toes started hurting first, that sharp pain that meant they were getting too cold, and then I began shaking and couldn't make it stop no matter how much I tried to hold still. The shaking got worse, and my teeth were chattering, and some kids near me started staring, and finally the school nurse noticed and brought me inside early before the drill was officially over. She took me to her office and wrapped my feet in warm towels from the heating cabinet, and while I sat there trying to stop shaking, she made notes in my file about cold being a medical trigger that needed special accommodations going forward. Alexandra taught me something at our next session that she called a warmth ritual for times when I got triggered by cold or woke up from nightmares about the porch. The ritual had 3 steps, and she made me practice them right there in her office so I'd remember. First, I had to make hot tea, any kind I wanted as long as it was warm, and hold the mug in both hands while I drank it slowly. Then I had to take a warm shower, not hot enough to hurt, but warm enough to feel it in my bones and stay under the water for at least 10 minutes. Finally, I had to sit under a weighted blanket for 20 minutes minimum while doing the slow breathing exercises she'd taught me before, breathing in for 4 counts and out for 6. Requested Reads is on Spotify now. Check out link in the description or comments. Alexandra explained that doing the exact same routine every time would help my body learn that it was actually safe now and that warmth was available whenever I needed it. During week 6, Mom posted something on Facebook that one of my classmates' parents saw and shared around. The post was all about being a concerned mother who was being kept from her child by an overreaching system that didn't understand her parenting methods, and it made her sound like the victim of some terrible mistake. Suddenly, some of the parents at the school pickup were looking at me weird or pulling Hugo aside to ask questions about what really happened, like maybe they thought Mom's version might be true. I felt ashamed all over again, like maybe I really had caused all this trouble for everyone by not being tough enough to handle Mom's training methods the way she'd intended. The shame made me want to curl up and disappear, and for a few days, I didn't want to go to the school at all because I couldn't stand the way people were looking at me. One night after dinner, Hugo sat down next to me on the couch and admitted that taking care of me was costing him a lot more than he'd expected. He showed me his grade report, and I could see his scores had dropped in 2 classes. Because he'd missed lectures and study sessions, and he pulled up his bank account on his phone so I could see how the reduced work hours were affecting his money situation. Instead of just telling me it was fine and not to worry about it like adults usually do, Hugo asked for my input on creating a schedule that would work for both of us. We spent an hour making a chart on paper that showed when he needed to study, when he had to work, when I had therapy or doctor appointments, and when we could have time together for meals and checking in. Having Hugo ask for my ideas instead of just telling me how things would be made me feel were included and useful, instead of just like a problem he had to manage. When Julian came back at the 2-month mark to do his risk assessment, he sat with Hugo for a long time, going over all the incident reports and progress notes. I could hear them talking in the kitchen while I sat on the couch pretending to do homework, and Julian's voice stayed serious the whole time. He came out and explained to both of us that my situation was still rated as high risk because of the nighttime wandering episodes and because Mom kept trying to make contact through third parties even after multiple warnings. Julian said he was going to recommend that the court appoint something called a guardian ad litem, which he explained was a person whose whole job would be to figure out what was actually best for me and report that to the judge. The guardian would interview me and Hugo and Nevaeh, and probably my teachers and therapists too, and then they'd write a report with recommendations about where I should live and what kind of supervision I needed. Julian said it wasn't a bad thing, that it just meant the court wanted an extra set of eyes making sure I was safe and getting what I needed, but it felt like more proof that I was too much trouble and too broken to just be a normal kid living with his brother. The next day, Hugo asked if I wanted to go pick out some real bedding instead of just using whatever old blankets he had lying around. We drove to a big store with aisles full of sheets and comforters and pillows stacked up to the ceiling, and Hugo let me choose everything myself instead of just grabbing whatever was cheapest. I picked out a thick comforter that had this pattern of mountains on it, not because I liked mountains, but because it looked warm, and Hugo added 3 extra pillows to the cart without me even asking. At the checkout, he pulled out a notebook, and we sat in the car, making a list of things I should do every night before bed, stuff like checking that the door was locked, and the heat was on, and my phone was charged in case I needed to call him. Writing it all down together instead of Hugo just telling me what to do made me feel like I actually had some control over what happened to me at night. And when we got back to the apartment and made up the couch with all the new bedding, it looked almost like a real bed instead of just a temporary sleeping spot. That night, I slept through until morning without waking up on the floor even once. And when I opened my eyes, Hugo was already awake making breakfast, and the apartment was warm, and I didn't feel that usual panic about whether I deserved to be there. A few days later, Nevaeh called Hugo asking if she could come stay for the weekend, and Hugo checked with Julian first to make sure it was allowed before saying yes. She showed up Friday after school with a backpack full of clothes and this nervous energy, like she wasn't sure if she was welcome. But I helped her set up a sleeping area next to mine on the floor with some extra blankets, and it felt almost normal having her there. We watched movies and ate pizza, and Hugo let us stay up late, and everything seemed fine until after Hugo went to bed around 11, and Nevaeh and I were lying there in the dark. She started whispering about how she missed the good days with Mom, the mornings when Mom would wake her up early, and do her hair in fancy braids and make special breakfasts with pancakes shaped like hearts, and how Mom would call her my perfect princess and tell her she was beautiful, and special. Listening to Nevaeh talk about those moments made something twist in my chest, because I realized she got to have good memories mixed in with the bad ones, while all I had was the porch and the cold, and Mom's voice telling me I needed to be tougher. I didn't say anything back to Nevaeh because what was I supposed to say? That I was jealous she got to be the perfect princess while I was the broken kid who needed fixing. Instead, I just lay there staring at the ceiling until I heard her breathing go slow and steady with sleep. Week 8 brought Dimitri the guardian ad litem to Hugo's apartment for a private meeting with me, and he sat across from me at the kitchen table with a notepad and a calm expression that made him seem less scary than I'd expected. He asked me regular questions at first about school and therapy and how things were going with Hugo, but then he asked something nobody else had quite asked before. He wanted to know what feeling safe actually meant to me, not what I thought the right answer was or what would make the adults happy, but what the word safe really meant in my own head. I had to sit there for a long time thinking about it, because I'd spent so many months trying to be what Mom wanted, and then trying to be what the system needed, that I wasn't sure what I actually wanted for myself. Finally, I told him that safe meant being warm whenever I wanted to be warm, not having to earn it by being tough or strong or resilient, and knowing that nobody would ever make me go back outside as punishment for being weak or dramatic or too much trouble. Dimitri wrote down everything I said without trying to change my words or tell me I should feel differently, and when he left, he shook my hand like I was a real person whose opinions actually mattered. Late March hit us with a cold snap that dropped temperatures back into the 20s at night, and I woke up that Monday morning, looked at the window showing gray sky and frost, and refused to leave the apartment, even to go to the school. Hugo didn't yell or force me or tell me I was being ridiculous. He just sat down next to me and asked what would make it feel possible to go outside. We talked for maybe 20 minutes, and eventually agreed that we'd wait until noon when the sun would be out and it would be warmer, and Hugo called the school to explain I'd be late because of a medical issue related to my recovery. Having a choice in when I faced the cold, instead of just being told to deal with it, made the fear feel less like it was crushing my chest. And when we finally left at noon with the temperature up to 40 degrees, I managed to walk to the car without my hands shaking too badly. At my next therapy session, Alexandra introduced something she called graded exposure, which she explained meant practicing being in the cold for very short amounts of time while I held something warm like hot chocolate or wore a heated jacket. She said the goal wasn't to make me tough the way Mom had wanted, but to help me learn that I could experience cold temperatures and still be in control of getting warm again whenever I decided to. We started right there in her office by having me stand near an open window for 30 seconds while holding a mug of hot tea, and even though my heart was racing the whole time, I made it through without panicking. Alexandra said we'd build up slowly over weeks and months, always at my pace, and that there was no pressure to ever be comfortable with cold the way other kids were. Week 9 brought a pre-hearing conference at the courthouse where Dimitri presented his initial findings to the judge about my case. Hugo and I sat in a small room with wood paneling and uncomfortable chairs, while Dimitri explained to the judge about my definition of safety and the progress I'd been making in therapy and how the kinship care with Hugo was providing stability I needed. Mom's defense attorney was there too, a woman in a dark suit who kept arguing that the no-contact order was too extreme and that Mom had completed a parenting class online and deserved a chance to start supervised visitation. The attorney made Mom sound like a concerned parent who'd made some mistakes but was working hard to fix them, and I felt my stomach clench up, hearing that version of events where I was just a confused kid who'd misunderstood tough love. Dimitri pushed back, though, referencing the medical records and the statements from multiple witnesses and my own descriptions of what had happened, and the judge said she'd take everything under consideration before the full hearing. Before the full hearing happened, Nevaeh submitted a written statement to the court through Dimitri, and he let me read it in his office one afternoon. In the statement, Nevaeh described finding photos on Mom's phone that were staged to look like I was happily camping outside, pictures where I was smiling at the camera, even though she remembered I'd been crying right before Mom took them. She also wrote about an argument she'd overheard between Mom and Dad years ago when she was really little, back before Dad left, where Dad was shouting that he was going to report Mom after another incident of leaving me outside overnight in winter. Reading Nevaeh's words on the official court paper made me realize she was finally choosing to tell the truth, even though it meant going against Mom, and I felt grateful and guilty at the same time, because I knew this was hard for her too. The judge made her decision at the full hearing in week 10, and Hugo and I sat in the courtroom while she read through her ruling about continuing the no-contact order and officially approving Hugo's kinship care arrangement. The judge said there would be ongoing CPS supervision, including monthly home visits and my continued therapy, and that Mom would not be allowed any contact with me until she completed a full evaluation and treatment program. I felt relieved that I could stay with Hugo and wouldn't have to see Mom, but I also felt exhausted from how much energy it took to keep proving to everyone that I was getting better and that I deserved to stay somewhere safe. Walking out of the courthouse with Hugo, I wanted to cry, but also wanted to sleep for about a week straight, and Hugo must have seen it on my face because he stopped and asked if I wanted to just go home and rest instead of doing anything else that day. After we got back to the apartment, I went straight to the bathroom and turned on the shower as hot as it would go. I stood under the water for probably 40 minutes, way longer than I'd ever let myself shower before, and I didn't feel guilty about using too much hot water or taking up too much space or being wasteful with resources. The hot water beat down on my shoulders and back, and I watched my fingers get pruny and wrinkled, and I just let myself stand there feeling warm all the way through my bones. Hugo didn't knock on the door or complain about the water bill or tell me to hurry up. He just let me take the time I needed, and standing under that endless warm water felt like the first clean breath I'd taken in months. In week 11, Mom managed to get a message to me through a family friend who didn't know about the court order, some woman who'd known Mom from church, and who stopped me outside school one day to pass along what Mom wanted me to hear. The message said Mom forgave me for lying about her, and that she knew I'd tell the truth eventually, once I stopped being influenced by the system and by Hugo's version of events. I took the note straight to Hugo, and he called Julian right away to report the violation, and Julian documented everything and sent a warning to Mom's attorney that any more attempts to contact me would result in additional criminal charges. The weird thing was that this time I felt more annoyed than scared, like Mom trying to manipulate me through other people were just tiresome instead of terrifying, and I noticed that shift in myself, even if I didn't totally understand what it meant yet. A few days later at the school, this kid named Arlo sat down across from me at lunch without making it weird or asking if he could sit there first. He just opened his lunch bag and started talking about some video game he was playing, asking if I'd ever tried it and explaining the different character classes like it was the most normal thing in the world to be having this conversation with me. I shook my head and told him I hadn't played it, and he kept going, describing this quest where you had to collect dragon scales and how he kept dying at the same boss fight. My throat felt tight because I'd forgotten what it was like to just be a regular kid, having a regular conversation about normal stuff, instead of being the trauma kid everyone whispered about in the hallways. Arlo didn't mention the hospital or Mom or any of it. He just talked about video games and complained about our math homework, and when lunch ended, he said I should come over sometime to try the game. Walking to my next class, I had to stop at my locker for a minute because my eyes were stinging, and I didn't want anyone to see me almost cry over someone being nice to me. That same week, Dimitri called Hugo to say that Dad's attorney had reached out offering to provide records from when Dad tried to report Mom to CPS back when I was 5 years old. The attorney sent over a whole file that included photos Dad had taken of me sleeping on the porch in winter, plus a written statement describing what he'd seen and why he was worried. There was also a personal note from Dad saying he couldn't be a caregiver for me now because he was dealing with his own mental health problems and wasn't in a place to take care of a kid. Reading that part hurt in a different way than Mom's stuff hurt, like a dull ache instead of a sharp cut. But it also made sense in a sad way because at least Dad was being honest about his limits instead of pretending he could handle something he couldn't. Hugo let me look through the photos Dad had taken, and seeing proof that someone had tried to help me years ago made me feel less alone, even though it hadn't worked back then. A couple days after that, Dimitri came over to Hugo's apartment to help me write my own statement for the court file about what warmth and safety meant to me after 3 months of therapy and living with Hugo. We sat at the kitchen table with a laptop, and Dimitri asked me questions while I tried to put my thoughts into words that made sense. I ended up writing about how I was learning that asking for warmth wasn't weak, and that real strength meant knowing when you needed help, which was the complete opposite of everything Mom had taught me about toughening up and handling things alone. Dimitri helped me organize my thoughts and make sure the statement was clear, and when we finished, he printed it out and had me sign it. Seeing my words on official paper that would go to a judge felt important, like my version of events finally mattered as much as Mom's version. In month 4, the prosecutor, whose name was also Arlo, met with Mom's defense attorney to talk about a plea deal instead of going to trial. Hugo told me later that the offer was for Mom to plead guilty to child endangerment charges and get probation instead of jail time. Plus, she'd have to do mandatory parenting classes and therapy. Mom's attorney told the prosecutor she was interested in accepting the deal because she wanted to avoid a trial where Neve's statement and Dad's records would become public and everyone would see the evidence. I felt relieved that I probably wouldn't have to testify in court and tell the whole story in front of strangers, but I also felt weird about Mom getting probation when what she did to me was so bad. Hugo explained that the legal system was complicated and that sometimes a guaranteed guilty plea was better than risking a trial where anything could happen. Around that same time, Neve came over for one of her visits and asked Hugo if there was any chance she could come live with us too, because things weren't going great with the foster family she'd been placed with. Hugo sat down with her on the couch and explained that it would need a separate court review and that his apartment was barely big enough for 2 people, let alone 3. But he promised he'd talk to Julian about what the process would look like and whether it was even possible. Neve looked disappointed, but she nodded and said she understood, and I felt bad that I was taking up the space she might have had if things were different. Later that night after she left, Hugo told me not to feel guilty because none of this was my fault, and we'd figure out a way to help Neve too. I had a bad setback in month 4, where I dreamed I was locked outside in a blizzard and couldn't get back in no matter how hard I pounded on the door. When I woke up, I was standing on the apartment's small, icy landing in just my socks, the cold concrete burning my feet before I fully came to and realized where I was. My heart was racing, and I felt frozen there for a second, stuck between the old pattern of staying outside and the new knowledge that I could go back in. Then I made myself turn around and open the door and go back inside instead of staying out there like my body wanted to do. My feet were red and stinging when I got back to the couch, and in the morning I told Hugo what happened. He didn't freak out or get mad, he just asked if I was okay and said we should tell Alexandra at my next therapy session. When I did tell Alexandra, she said it was actually progress because I'd stopped myself and interrupted the pattern instead of following it all the way through. A few days after that setback, Hugo and I made a decision together to throw out the old moldy sleeping bag that Mom had given me, the one that smelled like mildew and whatever defeat smells like. We turned it into a small ceremony where we made hot cocoa first and then carried the bag down to the dumpster behind the apartment building. Before Hugo threw it in, he said out loud that I deserved better than that bag had ever given me and that getting rid of it meant we were moving forward. Watching the bag disappear into the dumpster felt like letting go of something heavy I'd been carrying around without realizing it. We went back upstairs and finished our hot cocoa, and Hugo put on a movie, and I felt lighter than I had in weeks. At my next therapy session, Alexandra asked me to try reframing the word resilience from Mom's version, where it meant suffering alone in the cold, to a new version, where it meant having the courage to ask for warmth when I needed it. She had me practice saying out loud that I was resilient because I asked for help, and the words felt strange in my mouth at first, because they went against everything Mom had drilled into my head. But after saying it a few times, it started to feel kind of true, like maybe I was learning a different way to be strong that didn't involve freezing and pretending I was fine. Alexandra wrote the new definition on a card for me to keep and look at when I needed the reminder. In month 5, Mom sent a letter through her attorney that Dimitri brought to Hugo's apartment for me to see if I wanted to read it. Dimitri explained that the letter blamed me for not understanding Mom's intentions and for making her look like a monster when she'd only been trying to prepare me for a hard world. He said I didn't have to read it if I didn't want to, and I thought about it for a minute before deciding I was too tired of Mom's version of events taking up space in my head. I told Dimitri I didn't want to see it, and he put it back in his briefcase, and I felt okay about that choice, because I was starting to understand that I didn't owe Mom my attention just because she wanted it. Around that same time, Julian came by for one of his regular visits and told Hugo that he was reducing his visits to every other week instead of weekly, because we'd been consistently meeting all the safety requirements and my therapy progress was well documented. He said the oversight would continue, but that we were doing well enough to have a little more freedom and independence. Hugo smiled and thanked him, and after Julian left, Hugo told me it felt like a vote of confidence that we were handling things the right way. I felt proud that we'd worked hard enough to earn that trust, even though I knew we still had a long way to go before things would feel completely normal. The school meeting happened on a Tuesday morning in the middle of month 5, and I sat in a conference room with Hugo, the school counselor Maya, and the principal, while they went through every single accommodation they'd written into my 504 plan. Maya slid the official document across the table, and I read through the list slowly, seeing words like permanent pass to the nurse's office if cold triggers happened, flexible tardies on freezing mornings, and permission to keep a thermos of hot chocolate or tea during class. There was more stuff, too, about being able to step out if I felt panicky, and having extra time on tests if I needed it, and seeing it all typed up in an official school document with signatures and dates made something shift in my chest. It wasn't just me being dramatic or asking for special treatment. It was real needs that the school was recognizing and agreeing to help with, and Hugo squeezed my shoulder when he saw my eyes getting watery. I signed my name at the bottom where it said student signature, and Maya made copies for me. And Hugo and the teachers, and walking out of that meeting, I felt like maybe I was allowed to need help, instead of just toughing everything out alone. A few weeks later in late April, the temperature finally climbed above 60 degrees, and the sun came out strong enough that I could feel actual warmth on my face when I stood near the window. I'd been talking with Alexandra about the idea of choosing cold exposure on my own terms, instead of it always being something forced on me, and she'd suggested trying small experiments where I had complete control over when it started and when it ended. So that afternoon, I made a decision to try sitting outside on Hugo's tiny balcony for just 5 minutes, and I put on my coat, even though it was warm, and set a timer on my phone before I opened the sliding door. The sunshine felt different from I expected, warm and gentle instead of something I had to survive, and I sat in the plastic chair Hugo kept out there and watched the timer count down from 5 minutes. I could go inside whenever I wanted, I reminded myself. This was my choice, and nobody was making me stay out here, and that difference changed everything about how the air felt on my skin. When the timer went off, I stayed for 2 more minutes just because I could, and then I went back inside and made hot chocolate anyway because I wanted it, not because I was desperately cold. Alexandra smiled big when I told her about it at our next session and said that reclaiming choice was one of the most powerful parts of healing from what Mom had done to me. Month 6 brought the formal acceptance of Mom's plea deal, and Dimitri called Hugo to let us know that the paperwork had gone through and everything was finalized. Mom had pleaded guilty to child endangerment charges and gotten 3 years of probation, 200 hours of community service, mandatory therapy sessions, and a continued no-contact order that would stay in place until she could prove she'd completed all her requirements and a judge reviewed her case. There was no dramatic courtroom scene with Mom apologizing or me making a victim statement, just signatures on legal documents and a judge approving the terms, and I felt a quiet kind of relief instead of triumph or satisfaction. It was over in the legal sense, which meant I didn't have to keep worrying about court dates or what would happen next, and that felt like enough. Hugo, Navae, and I went out to celebrate at a diner that night, and before we even ordered, Hugo made a rule that we wouldn't talk about Mom for the entire meal. Instead, we talked about Hugo's upcoming finals and whether he'd pass his hardest class, and Navae told us about wanting to join the art club at her school because they did painting and pottery. We argued about pizza toppings for like 10 minutes, with Navae insisting that pineapple belonged on pizza, and Hugo and me telling her she was completely wrong, and it felt almost normal in a way that would have seemed impossible 6 months ago when I was still in the hospital. The waitress brought our food, and we ate burgers and fries, and Navae stole some of my fries, even though she had her own, and nobody cried or brought up the past, or made it heavy and serious. Just 3 siblings having dinner and talking about regular stuff, and I realized halfway through that I was actually having fun, instead of just surviving. Over the next few weeks, I noticed I was having fewer nighttime episodes of wandering toward doors or windows, though I still woke up sometimes in the middle of the night listening for the sound of wind or checking that the heat was actually on. Alexandra said healing wasn't a straight line, and that some hypervigilance might stick with me for a while, which made sense because my body had learned to be on alert for cold for so many months. She said I was building new patterns that would eventually feel more automatic than the old ones, like how I now reached for a blanket when I felt cold instead of just accepting it, or how I could ask Hugo to turn up the heat without feeling guilty. The progress wasn't dramatic or sudden, just small improvements that added up over time to feeling safer in my own skin. Around the same time, Nevaeh's case got reviewed separately by the court, and they approved a trial period of her staying with Hugo, and me on weekends, with the possibility of full-time placement if Hugo could find a bigger apartment that had room for both of us. She brought some of her stuff over that first weekend, including clothes and books and some art supplies, and we set up a sleeping area for her near mine, using extra blankets and pillows. Having her there made the apartment feel more like a family instead of just me and Hugo figuring things out alone, and even though it was crowded and we had to share the bathroom and coordinate schedules, it felt right. Navae helped make dinner that first night, and we watched a movie together, and she fell asleep on her makeshift bed before the movie even ended, and I felt grateful that she was getting out of whatever situation she'd been in before. In early summer, I had a checkup with the doctor who'd treated my frostbite back in February, and he examined my toes carefully and asked me questions about pain and numbness and how they felt in different temperatures. He told me I'd keep all my toes, which was the good news, but 2 of them had permanent nerve damage that might cause pain or numbness in cold weather for the rest of my life. It was hard to hear that I'd be dealing with physical consequences forever, but it also wasn't as bad as it could have been considering how close I'd come to losing toes entirely, and the doctor said I'd adapted remarkably well to managing the physical effects. He gave me some exercises to do and told me to come back in 6 months for another check, and leaving that appointment I felt okay about it, like I could handle having some permanent damage if it meant I was alive and safe. Hugo got approved for a work-study position at the university library around the same time, and it paid better than his old campus job and had flexible hours that worked around his classes and taking care of me. He came home excited that day and told me it would help with the money stress that had been building from all the extra costs of having me live with him. And then he admitted he'd also been going to counseling himself to deal with guilt about not recognizing the abuse sooner. Hearing that Hugo was taking care of his own mental health made me feel less like a burden, because it meant he understood that helping me was hard work that affected him too, and that taking care of himself made him better at taking care of me. We ordered pizza that night to celebrate his new job, and Neve was over, so she got to celebrate with us, and it felt good to have something positive happening instead of just dealing with hard stuff all the time. Alexandra and I started working on what life might look like long-term during our sessions, including strategies for handling future triggers and building relationships with people outside our small family unit. She reminded me that I'd done incredibly hard work over the past 6 months, and that continuing to heal would mean both celebrating progress and accepting that some things might always be a little harder for me than for other kids. We talked about what to do if I got triggered by cold weather in the future, and how to explain my needs to new people without feeling ashamed, and how to recognize when I was falling back into old patterns of thinking I deserved to suffer. It felt overwhelming sometimes to think about managing this stuff for years to come, but Alexandra said that's what therapy was for, to give me tools I could use whenever I needed them. She also said I should start thinking about making friends at the school and doing normal kid activities, which led to something unexpected happening the next week. A kid from the school named Arlo came up to me at lunch and asked if I wanted to come to his birthday party the next weekend, and 2 other kids who were standing with him nodded and said I should definitely come. It was the first normal social event I'd been included in since everything happened, and I felt nervous immediately about all the things that could go wrong or trigger me. But I told Arlo I'd think about it, and then I talked to Hugo about it that night, and he helped me plan what I'd need to feel safe, including making sure my phone was charged so I could call him if I got overwhelmed and having a backup plan for leaving early if I needed to. The party was at Arlo's house, and his parents had ordered pizza and set up games in the basement, and I almost turned around and went home 3 times before I even walked in the door. But once I got there, it was actually okay, just a bunch of kids hanging out, and playing video games and eating too much pizza and cake, and nobody made a big deal about me being there or asked questions about what had happened with my mom. I stayed for the whole party, almost 3 hours, and I actually had fun playing games and talking to kids and just being normal for a while. Riding home with Hugo afterward, I felt tired, but good, like maybe I could do regular kid things again, without everything being about trauma and recovery and court cases. Julian showed up for his month 6 evaluation with a thick folder of notes and spent 2 hours at the apartment asking me questions about my nighttime routines and therapy progress and whether I felt safe with Hugo. He checked the locks on the windows and doors, looked through my therapy journal that Alexandra had me keep, and watched how Hugo and I interacted when we made lunch together. A week later, he submitted his recommendation to the court that Hugo's kinship care should become permanent with reduced oversight because I'd made significant progress and the home environment was stable. The judge approved it at a hearing I didn't have to attend, but she added conditions that I had to keep going to therapy for at least 6 more months, and Hugo had to stay in regular contact with CPS. Hugo got the official paperwork in the mail, and we celebrated by ordering Chinese food and watching a movie, and it felt good to know that this arrangement wasn't temporary anymore. On one of Nevi's weekend visits in early summer, we all decided to go to a park a few blocks from Hugo's apartment, because the weather was warm and sunny. The park had swings and a jungle gym and a basketball court, and I stood there looking at the swings for a long time before Hugo asked if I wanted to try them. I hadn't been on swings since before Mom started the porch sleeping, back when Dad used to push me, and I'd try to kick the clouds with my feet. I sat down on the black rubber seat, and Hugo gave me a starting push, and suddenly I was moving through the air with the wind in my face and my stomach doing little flips. Nevaeh got on the swing next to me, and we had a contest to see who could go higher, and Hugo stood nearby watching us and smiling. The feeling of swinging back and forth with them nearby, knowing I could stop whenever I wanted, and that we'd all go home to a warm apartment afterward, made something loosen in my chest. I felt genuinely safe and cared for, in a way I hadn't felt in years, maybe ever. I keep a spare key to Hugo's apartment on a lanyard around my neck now, tucked under my shirt where I can feel it against my skin. It might seem weird to other kids, but it helps me remember that I have the power to get back inside to warmth whenever I need it, that no door is locked against me anymore. I still sometimes wake up in the middle of the night listening for the sound of doors locking or wind rattling against windows, my body tense and ready to curl up small. But the fear fades faster now than it used to, sometimes in just a few minutes instead of hours. I'm learning that the sound of safety is actually just the quiet hum of the heater and my brother breathing in the next room, steady and reliable and there. Well, that's the exciting conclusion. Said no one ever. If you made it to the end, you've earned my eternal confusion and respect. Might as well subscribe. You're already this far into the bad decisions.